The boat gently tugged along the water as the night grew darker and darker, its rhythmic motions easily lulling you into some much-needed sleep. It's the middle of May, colder than normal with the air still chilly. Finally asleep, it doesn't take long until you're startled awake when the sounds of screaming echoes aboard the boat. Groggily you sit up. A quick glance at your watch tells you that it's past midnight. Bewildered, you get up and rush outside to see what the commotion is about, an action you quickly grow to regret. Someone is aboard the ship. Someone with murderous intentions. Someone with his sights now set on you. The SS Prins Carl was a passenger steamship constructed in 1875. Until its decommission in 1938, the steamboat would take passengers between the cities of Arboga and Stockholm via Lake Mälaren. On the 16th of May, the year 1900, the steamboat was well on its way on this very trip. The crew anticipated an uneventful, perhaps even boring, journey to Stockholm. From its starting point in Arboga, passengers boarded the steamer and headed to their cabins. One of these passengers was a young man named Johan Philip Nordlund. Nordlund was born out of wedlock on the 22nd of March 1875. He had an older brother named Joel and a younger brother, Richard. Nordlund was said to have had a restless nature, one that drove him to run away from home and drift around the province of Dalarna with a schoolmate for a period in 1886. After being spotted by a friend of his parents, he was brought back home, but he did not wish to stay home, so he went on the run again in 1887. Nordlund was a pretty big guy even at his young age, which meant that he had no issue whatsoever finding work, as people assumed that he was an adult. He quickly found work as a sawmill worker, and based on later testimony, that job was the only decent job he had in his entire life. He would work at that sawmill for about a year before being fired due to a forged invoice. At this point, his parents had moved to another city, and with nowhere else to go, Nordlund would head home to his parents. But it was during this period that he had given up on the idea of even living an honest life. He decided that a life of crime was more suited for him, and took to the road once again. Run-ins with the law would soon follow. Johan Nordlund would be sentenced to 3 years in prison in 1893 after getting caught stealing. This was not his first crime, nor his first jail sentence, as he had already served 4 months for cattle theft. 2 years later, December 1895, Nordlund would be caught by the law once again and sentenced to 3 years imprisonment and 3 years loss of civic trust, which meant that he lost the right to vote, he was not allowed to testify in court, he was not allowed to hold public office, such as working as a teacher, and finally, he was also not allowed to work in any profession that required good judgment, also as a teacher. He was taken to a prison in Stockholm where he would serve his 4 years. It was during this time spent at the prison that his plans for the future began to take shape. He was released on the 20th of April, the year 1900, returning to the city where his parents lived. He did try to get some kind of job in his hometown, but no one was interested in hiring an ex-convict. As such, he eventually returned to a life of robbery and looting. After a few months of this, he got an idea. He now knew what his next target would be. One last big robbery. One that would solve all of his problems. On the 16th of May, the year 1900, 25-year-old Johan Philip Nordlund boarded the steamer Prins Carl in Arboga and bought a ticket to Stockholm. Unlike the other passengers on this steamer, Nordlund's luggage was very light, consisting of 2 revolvers, a knife, and a number of padlocks. In the Swedish book, translated roughly to The Mälar Murderer, the story of a crime, that was published in 1979, the plan was to rob as many people on the boat as possible, as well as stealing the ship's treasury. After that, he actually planned to set the boat on fire to avoid detection before he'd escaped. Originally, he planned on robbing another steamer, but the right opportunity never came. Still, he did manage to steal the ship's coffers. But now he had his sights set on the Prins Carl. The crime began shortly after midnight, when Nordlund stabbed his first victim, the ship's 43-year-old captain, Olof Rönngren. Killing the captain was done solely to sow chaos aboard the boat. He used one of the padlocks that he had brought with him to lock the door to the smoking compartment on the second deck, where at least 4 men were up playing cards. He also locked the door to the aft lounge, where 3 people were still up. The second victim was a 19-year-old farmhand named Julius Åkerlind, who was killed while he was asleep in the middle deck. At this point, the commotion had alerted many of the passengers to the danger. The third victim was a 34-year-old mother of 2 named Lovisa Karlsson, who was stabbed in the front of her 2 sons with such force that it broke the blade of the knife that Nordlund was carrying. 68-year-old cattle merchant Lars-Erik Falk and 38-year-old butcher Carl-Henrik Holmér had heard the commotion and rushed to try to help Mrs. Karlsson. Both men were shot in the head by Nordlund. The 38-year-old Holmér would die almost instantly, while the 68-year-old Falk would pass away a week later in the hospital. Now returning to the smoking compartment on the second deck, Nordlund broke a window and began firing wildly inside. Several people were hit by the bullets, but all of them would end up surviving. It was now complete chaos aboard the steamer. Blood covered the ground. Dead and wounded were everywhere. The commotion on board the steamer had drawn the attention of other ships that were nearby, many of which would start heading towards the now drifting steamer. The first to arrive was a ship called the Köping. As soon as he spotted the ship, Nordlund would fire wildly at it, halting its progress, but also alerting him to the fact that he needed to get off the ship. Nordlund would launch a lifeboat and rowed under the cover of darkness towards Tidö. Unlike his original plan, he did not manage to set the ship on fire, but the end result were 4 dead and 9 seriously injured on board. As soon as he came ashore, Nordlund hopped on a train. He arrived in another town, Eskilstuna, in the morning. With the money he had stolen, he bought new clothes and ditched his old ones. He was also planning to buy new shoes, but by this point the news of the murders had reached the papers. So much so that the clerk at the store began chatting with Nordlund about the murders. Nervously, Nordlund realized that he had to get out of town. Taking a cab to the train station, Nordlund planned to take the next train. His plan now was to travel to Copenhagen via Gothenburg, but the police were hot on his trail and had already connected Nordlund with the stranger trying to buy shoes. Contacting the train station, the police told the staff to hold off on the train for as long as possible. 3 police officers in civilian clothing arrived at the station shortly thereafter. They found Nordlund waiting for the train in the second-class waiting room. Entering the waiting room, the police officers first pretended to be passengers before one of them tackled Nordlund. A commotion would ensue, where Nordlund actually managed to get his gun out, which is promptly knocked out of his hand. Despite his struggles, Nordlund is wrestled to the floor by the 3 officers, and he kept screaming things like, "This was my revenge on humanity," and or "Be glad that you arrested me here. If I had gotten on the train, several more people would have been killed." He never showed any remorse. Once arrested, Nordlund was placed in a holding cell. Supposedly, news of what he had done had reached the general public, and an angry mob had formed and tried to get their hands on him, and they were barely stopped by the guards. While in custody, Nordlund would write a letter addressed to his 2 brothers and his parents, which would be published by the newspapers. In the letter, he told them that he felt the need to explain himself to someone, and that he was indeed the one who carried out the act that they had most likely read about in the newspapers at that point. He told his family that the only punishment that he would receive was capital punishment. He welcomed this death because it meant an end to his isolation, an ending to a life where he felt like he was not part of society. He ended his letter by telling his family not to take his death too seriously, and by wishing his brothers all the best in life. As evidenced by this letter, Nordlund knew that if he was caught, he would not be able to escape a death sentence. Even so, he never showed any remorse for his crime at any point during his trial. Quite the opposite, in fact. He instead expressed disappointment that he had not managed to kill those that he had wounded. In the end, though, his prediction would come true. His sentence was death. During his time in prison, he also attempted to escape, but was apprehended by the guards, though not before managing to stab 2 guards with a sharpened hasp. He would explain the incident by stating that he had nothing to lose. This attitude of his was prevalent the entire time. Nordlund was reportedly also a very violent prisoner. So much so that when the time for his execution came, the prison guards were relieved to be rid of him. He was offered the opportunity to plead for leniency, but he chose not to. Instead, he wrote a letter to the Supreme Court stating that he felt he had been wrongly convicted of robbery of people he never attempted to rob. The response from the Supreme Court was that this was without merit, and that the sentence that he received from the court was the correct one. While awaiting his execution, Nordlund would often be visited by his mother and the prison chaplain. On the 5th of December, he wrote his last letter to his family, stating that he had sought the Lord's forgiveness for his sins, and that would be the last time his family ever heard from him. He would be correct. On the morning of December 10th, Johan Philip Nordlund was escorted to the prison yard, strapped to a block, and beheaded by the executioner in one single blow. His family would receive his body, and unlike many other prisoners, he was actually allowed a burial in consecrated ground. This was something that previously had been illegal up until around 1860. But even after the law had changed, it was highly unusual for a criminal to get that kind of burial. What's interesting too is that the family only received the body of Nordlund, as his skull ended up in the Anatomical Institute in Uppsala. The ruthless nature of Nordlund's crimes created a media hysteria in Sweden at the time. As such, it received considerable attention in the newspapers, many of whom would compete with each other on the number of victims. For instance, an issue of the newspaper Svenska Dagbladet that was published on the 17th of May 1900 had the headline "Horrifying Drama on the Steamer Prins Carl. 12 people shot, 7 so far dead," which is a higher number than what actually happened. After his execution, a public debate began about whether the type of crime Nordlund had committed could be considered hereditary or not. This is because Nordlund had nothing but good things to say about his parents, who supported their son until the very end. He did not come from a family that had a history of crime, so the debate centered around what could have caused this. He seemingly came from a good family, yet he committed this act and showed no remorse. Some would forego that debate entirely. Instead, they argued that his lack of remorse and lack of empathy for the victims was evidence of insanity. In later years, there have been some arguments that his feelings of isolation from society is what ultimately drove him to commit the crimes that he committed. In the end, it doesn't really matter. We can never truly know what drove a man to commit the deeds that he did. All we know is that Johan Philip Nordlund killed 5 people and injured 8 on a chilly May night in 1900, becoming a mass murderer and the second last man to be executed in the country of Sweden. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. It truly means the world. Now, take care of yourself. Goodbye.